The City of Southport Board of Aldermen special meeting, March 28th, 2023 is now called to order. Thank you for your attendance. Welcome, and welcome to those who are watching virtually. Our invocation will be by Reverend Alderman Lowe Davis, and this will include prayers for the city of Nashville and the families who suffered that tragedy of the shooting at the school yesterday. This will be followed by our Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand.
Let us pray. Father God, we stand before you today in gratitude, but also in sorrow, because we know that at this very moment, even as we are lifted up by your blessings, others are weighted down in grief. Keep us all, we pray, in the light of your love and understanding, so that we can see ways, either by our words or our actions, to guide others into the light of peace. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Alderman Davis, for those beautiful words of prayer. Next item will be the approval of the agenda. I'll entertain a motion. Motion by Alderman Davis, a second by Mr. Lombardi. Any discussion? All in favor by show of hands? Okay. Any opposed? Okay. Passed unanimously. Thank you. Item E is our agenda, and before we get started, I just have a very brief introductory remarks. Our meeting today is a presentation of multiple bills, from accessory dwellings to affordable housing. We're here to listen, to discuss, and I recommend to vote on a resolution to be sent to the legislature. And this will be written by staff and signed by the mayor, that in part includes Southport supports addressing critical, and I quote, critical housing shortages for firefighters, law enforcement officers, teachers, nurses, first responders, and other vital workers and first-time home buyers. We do not support losing municipal power over the planning process of home building and developments, short-term rentals, and other planning issues. I attended a session of the House of Representatives at our legislature in Raleigh last month. I plan to return to deliver this resolution in person. And a resolution is a document that states the position of a city. I've spoken to Senator Rabin and Representative Miller about our concerns and the importance of municipalities having local control over developments, so they are aware of our concerns on this and other related issues. To further inform our citizens, I've asked the city manager to post, if possible, the recent NC League of Municipalities webinar concerning these recently proposed bills. I've spoken with Charlotte Mayor Walt Eckerd. We discussed the importance of preserving municipal authority. He will be contacting all the local mayors, and he and I will coordinate a response to the legislature of the importance of local control and municipal authority over developments and other pertinent issues. So I want to thank the board for being here today, and for staff for helping to put this meeting together. City manager, our community relations, public information, thank y'all. Madam Clerk, thank you. And I will call on our city planner, Travis Henley, to begin our presentation and discussion. So thank you.
All right, Mr. Mayor, members of the board, members of the public, good afternoon. Nothing like land use legislation on a Tuesday afternoon, that's for sure. I've got some slides here. There's 6 different bills that I'm going to cover. Some of them only have one slide. Some of them have quite a number of slides, as you might imagine, having looked at some of these bills. So I'm going to rock through the the more simple ones first. But certainly if the board has any questions, stop me at any point. I'll be honest, I'm still learning about these bills as well. Some of them are less than 2 weeks old, so any answers I can't give you today, I will research and get back to you as soon as I can. The first bill is HB 252. This concerns multi-jurisdictional property, and what is meant by this is property that is within multiple planning jurisdictions. So for example, in Southport's case, the majority of where these parcels exist would be on the edge of the ETJ, bordering up against Brunswick County, and it would be where the ETJ line does not follow parcel boundaries. Currently within North Carolina General Statute, specifically Chapter 160D, local governments in a case where a property is within multiple planning jurisdictions can enter into an agreement via resolution adopted by the two or however many local governments are involved to assign the planning and development controls to one entity, as opposed to having, say for instance, out on the edge of the ETJ, having Southport review the piece within the ETJ and Brunswick County review the piece that's not within the ETJ. There's nothing that says we have to do that. It's a tool that is given to local governments if they choose to do so. This proposed bill does not eliminate that authority. We absolutely 100% maintain the ability to enter into those agreements. But if we don't have an agreement for a particular parcel, the landowner gets to choose. And they can enter into an agreement with whichever planning authority they would like to. And as long as they do that and that agreement is signed and recorded, then that's the planning jurisdiction that would cover the entire property. There's also some amendments within the bill just in terms of timing of the resolutions and when they can, when they take effect. But really the big kind of upshot here is that a landowner would get to pick if we don't have such agreements in place. So.
I'm sorry, I don't want to slow your roll, but can you tell us what the negatives for the city would be in this?
Well, the negatives would be that what we have a property zoned and what, say, in this hypothetical scenario, Brunswick County has the property zoned could be vastly different and could absolutely be completely different than what our land use plan suggests as the desired development outcomes for that particular area. And there would be, as far as my reading of the bill, there would be no recourse for us to stop that, even though it's within our planning jurisdiction.
To put it in more simple terms so I can understand this, the land, hypothetically, sits in the ETJ, and right now we would have control of that zoning, but it sits in the county. So who wins in that one?
This would not, if a parcel of land is fully within our ETJ, then this bill does not affect that. It's only when the ETJ, the line of where the ETJ stops, would run through a parcel.
So a developer could buy one lot over the line, and that would make it two jurisdictions, and they could theoretically go with the county on that.
Theoretically, yes, they could.
Okay, thank you.
And to me, to talk about what Alderman Davis was saying is, in our case, it would be no tree ordinance, no right to require utility designation, no carrot for voluntary annexation, no lighting ordinance. I mean, there's a whole host, and I think our stormwater is probably stricter than the county's as well. So,
anything that's unique to us goes away, and it would go to whichever local government is taking it on. If we bordered on Oak Island, the same thing could happen between us and Oak Island. All right, moving right along. Short-term rentals. The first thing I will say here is that as of right now, this is the only bill in the legislature that talks about short-term rentals. I would hazard a guess to say that it won't be the last proposed this session. This one's a little bit different than the rest of the bills we're going to talk about today because it's actually giving local government more power, not less. Essentially, as the bill is, as it's written, quite long, but the changes that it's making are actually not quite as drastic. It clarifies that local governments may enforce a maximum occupancy provision within vacation rental properties, and the bill includes a statutory cap at 4 persons per bedroom within a vacation rental, but permits a local government to go more strict than that if they so choose. It also clarifies that landlords and real estate brokers must verify the bedrooms and bathrooms within these vacation rentals. Make sure that all those requirements as regard to occupancy and so forth is being followed in accordance with any applicable local ordinance or code. As I said, this one's a little bit different than the other 5 in that it actually gives us power as opposed to taking it away, but.
Could you talk about the inspection part of it? It's like on the front page.
Yes, so this section is already within North Carolina general statutes as it exists today. It's regarding the minimum housing code and essentially gives a code enforcement officer or a building inspector the ability to make periodic inspections in accordance with a local minimum housing code to make sure that we're following the minimum housing code.
So this is already in existence. This is not something that's new, the way it's written.
Yeah, in your, if you're looking at the bills, the only thing that would be added would be the stuff that's underlined.
Would be, I'm sorry, sir?
Any of the language that's underlined,
Okay,
that would be the additions.
thank you.
I should point out, there's another bill we're coming to where that statement I just made won't apply, but it's a new program, not a statute amendment. Any other questions? All right. So this is the first one, House Bill 332. It has a Senate bill counterpart, Senate Bill 275. This title is Streamlined Commercial and Multifamily Building Plan Review. So the first thing I'll say is that this applies not to zoning or planning related review. It's only at the building permit stage. So this is after a commercial or multifamily project is approved and entitled from a planning perspective, then these regulations come into play. It essentially, and I'm going to use this term again, especially since we're in tournament time anyway, a shot clock to review commercial and multifamily plans submitted and sealed by a professional engineer. So the person in this case reviewing these plans is our building inspector, Kylie Barefoot. The shot clock is 21 days from the receipt to approval or denial. If changes are requested, the city would have a further 15 days to review and issue the permit entirely. If the permits are not issued within the timeframes provided within this bill, then the applicant then has the ability to seek out a third party to review the plans. And if the third party reviews those plans and it's submitted to the city has 72 hours to issue the permit. What's nice in that, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So if you went to the third party, does this specify that the third party is a certified building inspector?
It requires...
Or just your next door neighbor?
It would not be your next door neighbor, at least I would hope not. Let's see. Sorry, I'm just reading the section here. The permit applicant, so this would be if say it's me who's asking for a building permit, the permit applicant may elect to utilize the Department of Insurance and its marketplace pool of qualified code enforcement officials or elect to hire a licensed professional engineer or licensed architect certified under General Statute 143, so on, to review and certify submitted plans as required by subsection D of this section. So it would not be your next door neighbor, no. But if your next door neighbor is a professional engineer or professional architect, then maybe it could be.
I don't suppose this spells out who would pay for that third party's review.
It does not specify, but the assumption would be the developer or the applicant. However, it does say that if the applicant takes advantage of the third party, the local government would have to refund all plan review and permit fees, which in the case of a commercial structure or multifamily structure is a rather substantial permit fee. It does discharge the local government from any liability arising from the approval of the permit, though, if they choose the third-party track. But
So Travis, to make sure that we're all on the same page, this does not have any impact on when a plan would be going to the planning board. They would still have their time.
right,
And then the aldermen would have their time.
Right.
But after those 2 points took place, then for the review, the technical review, for lack of a better term, and to clarify, does a developer, can he or she choose, do they get to choose which way they want to go? Or is it if we just fail to do it in X number of days?
it's if we run out the clock,
If we run out the clock, then they get to choose to go a different route.
or if we haven't run out the clock, but if we know we're going to run out the clock.
And how long does it normally take us to do one of these reviews, assuming that they've got nothing else to do in their day? Like there's no other developments coming in, there's no other people calling questions in. We've got, I don't know, I think you told me like 600 residential units that are in some point of the system right now, not counting Indigo.
Right.
Just that part. Is 21 days a reasonable length of time? Can it act, well, not reasonable, is 21 days doable?
In the hypothetical scenario in which our plan reviewer wasn't also our building inspector, this timeline could be achievable. I have no doubt. And to be honest, and this, there hasn't been many major commercial projects or multifamily projects that have made it to the building inspector for his review in my time with Southport, but he's meeting these plan review timelines right now. But if something much bigger were to come down the pipe.
So that there's no way for the jurisdiction to say, we want to mulligan on this one because we've got 18 projects that just were laid on our desk at one time. It doesn't make any difference on the volume. You're stuck with what it is.
The bill would give us the ability to work with the applicant to agree to a different timeline, but there's nothing that requires the applicant to accept that.
Okay. Thank you.
I hate to keep dwelling on this one, but another hypothetical. The applicant turns in the application, the shot clock runs out, the applicant says, I'm not going to spend my money on a third party. What happens?
Based on the bill, it would just stay with us as if it was, that's the way it runs today.
I'm not sure what that means.
It would, if they chose not to go with the third party, then the approval of the plans comes when the building inspector approves the plans.
It wouldn't be just automatically accepted?
No, it is not an automatic approval.
Okay.
Travis, typically when we think of conflict of interest, we think of financial gain. And if the developer is hiring the inspector, how are they able to not consider this a conflict of interest?
Well, if they were hiring an inspector, it would go through the Department of Insurance and their approved marketplace pool. I'll be honest, I don't have a lot of experience with the marketplace pool because we thankfully have never had to use it ourselves. for plan reviews or farming out inspections or those sorts of things. If they're hiring a third-party engineer or a third-party architect, though, then we're effectively relying on the seal at that point. The same way that, you know, the whole purpose of this bill at the front of it all is relying on the seal of the engineer or architect who originally drew it up as well. So that would be, we'd be relying on the seals.
Travis, so this says, specifically says plan submitted by a professional engineer. Is it literally that literal? Or, I mean, what if an architect submitted the plans?
Does the bill say? The bill just says engineer from the original submittal. So it would be somebody with a professional engineering, the seal, essentially, someone who's passed the professional engineer exam and has certified that the plans meet all applicable codes and regulations based on their seal.
I mean, okay. Would that include an architect? Or is there always going to be, is it going to be both an architect and a engineer seal on plans?
Sometimes you'll see both, but not always. Sometimes it's just an engineer, sometimes it's just an architect. So the bill under Section A, the amendment, it says plan review of sealed plans, and it would be the seal of a professional engineer license under Chapter 89C of General Statutes or an architect license under Chapter 83A of the General Statutes.
Okay, so it says both.
It does say both.
And then what happens if they go the third-party route and a error has been made by that third-party reviewer? Do we have any ability to go back and see that the developer builder corrects that error? Or, I mean, or does it just get built incorrectly and we all just have to live with it? Or I don't.
There's nothing in the bill that speaks specifically to that item, but just in general, you know, it's the responsibility, it's the ethical, really, and moral responsibility of the building inspector, whether the set of plans has been reviewed by him, by someone else. If it's in the course of being built and something appears to be out of compliance with the code, it's his responsibility to point that out, regardless of if the plans were approved with that error still on there or not.
And and the builder would have to do whatever our building inspector says to correct the issue.
Correct. Any other questions on this one?
The only other thing is in F, manufacturer information. It seems to me that with evolving and new technology in the construction industry, this would be pushing out. They're not considering whatever they're suggesting, and they're approving it without really understanding what they're using.
Correct. It would seem to suggest that as well.
I'm sorry, could you restate that for me?
So there's a section under Section F of the bill, manufacturer information. It says, in the event the local government requires manufacturer specifications or manufacturer engineering information on an element, component, or fixture related to the submitted plans, a local government shall not delay or deny the issuance of applicable permits based upon the receipt of specifications or manufacturer engineering information on an element, component, or fixture. So basically, if, say there's, let me try to create a hypothetical here. Say something is shown on the plans that is new to our building inspector. He's never seen it before. And the applicant is claiming, well, it's engineered to meet this section of the North Carolina Building Code. And Kylie's response, as it should be, okay, well, if that's the case, then show me. this section would seem to say that when Kylie says, show me, great, I will show you, but I can't hold up your building permit, or you can't hold up my building permit while I get you that information.
And that could be even on a prefab where we're talking about hurricane codes or structural integrity things as well?
It could be anything.
Okay.
A lot of my experience with it comes with regard to floodplain regulations and how we require the engineered specifications on flood vents for enclosures below the flood elevation. Wow, that probably didn't make sense to anybody. That's a lot of the kind of engineering information, but because every project's different and because our inspector is really reviewing these plans, it could literally be anything.
So and I should have asked this in the beginning, but as we get through with all these 6 things, there's unique things that you have identified and we have identified as being shortcomings in these bills. Is there going to be a real short summary of that stuff, so when we give it to, and the mayors all go out to do their thing, speaking for the city as they are the voice of the city for those things, that they have that in their pocket as opposed to a general thing, I don't like this?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay,
Yes,
thanks.
sir. All right, the first one with multiple slides. So the next one, House Bill 294, is the North Carolina Housing Choice Incentive. This is the creation, and this is the one that I was talking about where it's a complete new program, so there's not going to be strike-through or underline or anything like that. This is the creation of the Housing Choice Grant to, and I'm reading straight off the paper here, empower and encourage local governments to address the critical housing needs in their communities. So it's a $30 million grant program for communities to establish and promote multifamily, middle housing, and accessory dwelling units, and it defines each of those. An accessory dwelling unit is accessory to the primary dwelling and meets North Carolina building codes. We're going to talk a lot more about accessory dwellings here in a minute. Middle housing, it defines it as a duplex, triplex, quadplex, or townhouse. That's it. That's all it says. And then multifamily housing is a residential dwelling comprised of 4 or more units, each intended to be occupied by a person or family for use as a residence, and also includes accessory dwelling units and middle housing for the purposes of this section in the definition. The grant funds are to be used by local governments for local water, sewer, and transportation infrastructure projects. So to be eligible for the grant, the requirements are different for communities with less than 100,000 population and more than 100,000. So for the communities with less than 100,000, there must be 5 zoning districts of reasonable size where multifamily housing is a permitted use. And those zoning districts must meet at least 4 of these 7 criteria, which are a minimum gross density of 15 units per acre. The district contains no age restrictions. The districts contain no parking minimums. The districts allow for setback waivers. The districts allow for accessory dwelling units. The districts have permissive building height requirements. And the districts allow residential development in areas not zoned for residential use. So, notwithstanding the last one of those, which if a district allows residential development in areas not zoned for residential use, well, that area is zoned for residential use if that district allows it. But anyway, yeah, needless to say, Southport has 0 zoning districts that check all 4 of those boxes.
Does this require us to create?
No, it does not require us to create any of this unless we want grant money. Local governments are eligible for up to $1 million per grant and must also demonstrate in their application that the districts have produced a significant number of housing units. When eligible grantees exceed the available funds, then the funds are dispersed on a per capita basis based on population of each community. The county or municipality applying can only receive one grant every 5 years. And the grant funding, again, is for local water, sewer, or transportation infrastructure projects. That's the last one I have. So,
Can I ask you a question, Travis? So, it says must have produced. So does that mean that you'd only get the grant money after, when do you get it? After something has been built?
it would seem to be
What's
that,
a significant number?
well, good question. It would seem to be that this bill would be not only for localities that have created the zoning districts, but also can prove that the zoning districts accomplished the goal of increasing housing. Now, what that number means, and again, shooting from the hip here with regard to what this actually meant, but a significant number is relative to each community, which is why they're leaving the carve out there. Correct. If other folks are doing better, then it's a competitive grant program.
So there's nothing in this particular bill that if we choose not to play in the game, that we're going to be punished somehow?
No.
Okay, thank you.
All right, now we're getting into the really fun ones. So, House Bill 409, this one also, as of yesterday, has a Senate counterpart, Senate Bill 374, accessory dwelling units. Local governments shall allow the development of at least one accessory dwelling unit for each single-family dwelling in areas zoned for residential use that allow for the development of a single-family dwelling. Currently, Southport already does this. We allow for one single-family or accessory dwelling unit on each property zoned for single-family use. But this bill goes quite a bit further than that. An accessory dwelling unit defined in this bill is an attached or detached residential structure that is used in connection with or that is accessory to a primary single-family dwelling and that has less total square footage than the primary single-family dwelling. So if I own a home that's 3,000 square feet and want to build an accessory dwelling unit, the accessory dwelling unit can be no larger than 2,999 square feet. Southport's current cap is 800. Accessory dwelling units shall not be subject to any of the following: any sort of owner occupancy of any dwelling unit, including the accessory, any minimum parking requirements or any other parking requirements. Local government cannot require conditional zoning as a means of approval of an accessory dwelling unit. We don't require conditional zoning for ADUs. We do require special use permits, though. Local government also shall not prohibit the connection of the ADU to existing utilities serving the primary dwelling and may not charge any fee other than a building permit that does not exceed the amount charged for any single-family structure similar in nature.
Can you define that last sentence? Does that mean you can't charge the development fees, or you can?
Oh, you could do that.
Okay, all right.
It can't be because you're an accessory dwelling, like say, I want to build an accessory dwelling unit on my property and you want to build the exact same structure as your primary dwelling. The city couldn't charge me more because mine's an ADU and yours is a primary structure.
And are you saying that right now, under our code, if I wanted to build an 800 square foot house behind my primary house, I can do that?
You would have to request a special use permit and have it approved by the Board of Adjustment in accordance with all the standards that we have for accessory dwelling units.
But with this, I would not have to do that.
I'm going to come back to that point.
Okay.
I've got a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Oh, I was just reading to be sure I was getting it right. Okay. Districts have permissive building height. Still, okay, sorry. We have to have permissive building height requirements. Is that, this will require us to have permissive building heights?
That was for the housing grant.
No, this is under 294.
We're on 409 now.
All right.
This is a quote, "Except as provided in this section, a local government may regulate accessory dwelling units pursuant to Chapter 160D, 160D being the part of North Carolina general statutes that lets us enforce zoning, provided that the regulations do not act to discourage development or siting of accessory dwelling units through unreasonable cost or delay." So it's not explicitly stated, but this would seem to call into question our requirements of getting a special use permit for an accessory dwelling unit, because it would be treating the accessory dwelling unit differently than it would a regular single-family primary structure. The bill doesn't explicitly say that, but based on my reading of it, that's what it appears to do. Of course, that does not affect the validity of private covenants or any other contractual agreements among property owners, as is the case with the vast majority of regulations that a local government can enforce. And a local government may impose a setback minimum for accessory dwelling units of 5 feet, or the setback minimum imposed generally upon the lots in the same zoning district, whichever is less. So for a smaller accessory structure, a 5-foot setback is reasonable, but back to my 2,999 square foot accessory dwelling unit example, it would be subject to a 5-foot setback, which is not a lot at all.
And to confirm, did you say in legalese that this does not apply to HOAs? Is that what you said?
If the HOA covenants prohibited accessory dwelling units or had other restrictions. So the overall takeaways here, ADUs are allowed in all residential districts that allow for single family. Size restriction is just smaller than the primary. Southport currently allows ADUs in all residential zoning districts, as I mentioned, but requires special use permit. The bill is questionable whether it would force us to change that requirement to allow for it by right, the same way that a regular single-family home is, and it is a preemption of a number of other requirements, including the owner occupancy requirements, setback requirements, and parking.
And this would apply to our non-conforming lots?
It would appear to, yes.
Yes. And would void out things like rear yard, open space, those kinds of requirements that we have?
To the extent they apply to a single-family lot, yes.
And that whole pervious issue doesn't matter here under this, because you could use up everything because you up to the 5-foot mark.
Well, it's the impervious versus impervious is not addressed. If you're part of a state stormwater permit, then you still would have to abide by the regulations of that state stormwater permit if there's impervious surface caps. It doesn't seem to do away with that piece of this.
Both for me and the audience, could you explain how much of the city is under those type of rules?
Generally, subdivisions more recent than 1985 would be subject to those rules, but anything else, the state's stormwater permit system did not exist prior to 1985.
Thank you.
This also seems to be in favor of short-term rental. because it does away with the owner occupancy, and so that's another factor.
It certainly would. Now, our zoning rules with regard to accessory, or with regard to short-term rentals would still apply generally. So if an ADU was being used as a short-term rental in the R10 district where it's not a permitted use at all, then at least as of right now, we still have, for us, but for other local governments, yeah, this would absolutely open the proverbial floodgates.
Travis, what's the smallest setback that we currently have for non-conforming lots?
Smallest would be a side 4-foot setback for a non-conforming R10 lot. Any other questions on this one? All right. Probably the one everyone's here for. So, Senate Bill 317, I looked about an hour and a half ago. I did not see a House bill counterpart to this yet. I would expect to see one any day now, addressing the workforce housing crisis. So I've got a bunch of slides here. Certainly feel free to stop me at any point. So the first thing the bill does is it defines a workforce housing development and a workforce housing improved lot. And of course, the definitions are that it goes on further in statute. The workforce housing development is the overall development, as the name would suggest, and a workforce housing improved lot is a lot within the workforce housing development that is conveyed to a qualifying person. And I will get into what that means here in a second. As you work down the bill and its amendments to statute, you'll see that one of the first things it does is it prohibits local governments from applying any dimensional standards or design requirements to any project that meets the definition of a workforce housing development. So what is a workforce housing development? It's at least 10 acres in size, and at least 20% of the lots within that workforce housing development shall be improved with a 1 or 2 family dwelling and conveyed as a workforce housing improved lot. The rest of the lots must also be 1 or 2 family dwellings or accessory structures. So this doesn't, the way it's written right now, this wouldn't be single family for the workforce housing lots and then multifamily or commercial or anything like that for the rest of the project. This would all be single family or 2 family dwellings. For those workforce housing lots, at least 50% of them, just the workforce housing lots, shall be conveyed to owner occupants not making more than 80% of area median income. The rest would have to be conveyed to someone not making more than 100% of area median income. I looked yesterday, and to the extent that you can find reliable information that talks about area median income for an area of our size, it was Brunswick County as a whole, and the median income was $77,500.
Doesn't it have some wording in there about the area being the area where the housing is taking place? And that would be Southport, as opposed to the 1,000 square miles of Brunswick County.
That's what it says, yes.
Okay.
Finding reliable information at that small of a scale is a little bit more challenging.
But to meet the requirements, somebody would have to figure that out.
Somebody would have to figure that out.
As opposed to the 77,000 figure, it might be more than that.
It could be more than that, yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Yeah, that number is just what I found. So those workforce housing improved lots, the owner occupant must move in within 60 days of the conveyance of the lot to the owner. The owner occupant has either a greater than 50% ownership interest in the lot or is the beneficiary of a trust for estate planning and where the settlers of the trust have placed the lot into that trust. I'm not an expert on estates and trusts and all that stuff, so just being transparent. The owner occupant must maintain residency for at least a majority of a calendar year after moving in. After the first year, the owner occupancy requirement is extinguished. That's the upshot of this entire bill, right there. It must be occupied by a family and/or other group of no more than 3 other persons not related to the owner as well. Wanted to include that one because that is not something that planning departments typically regulate. I don't know how you realistically could regulate that unless you're visiting every property every day. And there's not a planning department in the whole country that has the capacity to do that. And it would also seem to directly contradict a number of other restrictions on doing that very thing that exists in state statute today.
This almost looks like a fair housing violation.
It probably could be.
That does not make sense that you would, yeah.
And this applies to, let's say it's a 10-acre subdivision.
Yes.
All of the 10 acres are exempt from all of the standards if 20% of them apply as, or are set aside and supposed to be for workforce housing, which the half of them have to be to people whose income is no more than 80% of the area median income, but half of them are for people whose income is 100% of the area median income. And they only have to live there for 6 months. And everything goes away after a year.
Correct. Yes.
Can I insert a comment here? If we're wondering how this has come to be, I read you the headline of a legislative report from the North Carolina Home Builders Association, and the headline is, North Carolina Home Builders Association introduces groundbreaking legislation to address the workforce housing crisis. Thank you, Home Builders Association.
So Travis, you answered my question because of Alderman Davis's question, and that is if 20% is dedicated to workforce housing, the other 80% also does not have to have all the zoning requirements. And can you go kind of list those, right? Like, can I build a 47-story building? Can I make this Myrtle Beach if I wanted to?
Well, it would have to be single or 2-family dwellings on the rest of the project. So multifamily, at least the way the bill's currently written, you're not going to see the rest of the project become multifamily or commercial or anything like that. It would all be the most you would see is a duplex.
But the 20% could be
The 20%
higher or
would
not?
also be single family or
Okay,
duplex.
So we still have a height limit.
Well, I'm getting to that.
Okay.
Yeah.
okay.
Because, I'm sorry, so I'll wait till you get to it.
Okay. Okay. All right. A workforce housing development meeting the applicable regulations as defined by statute shall be permitted in any zoning district, no matter the district's intent or allowable uses within it. So, does this mean that one of these could be approved in an industrial district? Yes, absolutely. Could it be approved in an open space district? Yes, absolutely. Every zoning district. If by some crazy, act, the CBD had a parcel that met the 10-acre requirement, it could happen there. That's what they've shown. A local government may require the provision and maintenance of a not more than 20-foot vegetative buffer along the perimeter of the project, and that is the full extent of any landscaping requirement that a local government can impose upon these projects. So all of our tree retention, everything is gone other than the buffer.
So we're back to clear cutting everything.
Oh, yes, absolutely. So what can we regulate? There's a couple things. The North Carolina residential building and trade codes absolutely still apply. Any minimum housing codes still apply. And any subdivision regulations related to roads or rights of way and utility performance style regulations, all of those still apply as well. So what we're not going to see is, as the course of a project like this, as it was getting built and they chose to do, gravel roads and then tried to turn those over to the city, that's not how this works. They would still have to meet any of our requirements in terms of the road construction or how the water and sewer lines are built, that sort of thing. It also goes on to say that local government shall not implement or enforce an ordinance or regulation that is more restrictive than or that exceeds requirements necessary to comply with federal or state law. And this is from, the League of Municipalities has been mentioned a number of times. This is where one of the big sticking points for the North Carolina chapter of the American Planning Association is because the section of statute that it's talking about is a local government's ability to regulate, among other things, stormwater and floodplains. So Southport goes a lot further from a stormwater requirement standpoint than the state does, especially when it comes to retaining water and making sure that water isn't pushed off onto anyone else. At the same time, on floodplain regulations, how tall we make a building in the floodplain go is a local requirement. All the federal government requires us to do is elevate a building to the base flood elevation. Southport makes you go 3 feet higher than that. Based on the way the bill is written, we would only be able to enforce what the federal government says is the minimum standard, not any local ability, or not any local attempt to go above and beyond those requirements. It's unclear, though. That's one of the big questions that a lot of folks have about this bill. So how are these things approved? Administrative approvals only. The bill would allow for staff or a planning board to approve a preliminary site plan, provided that only the criteria laid out in the statute be considered as part of the approval. The bill does not mention elected officials as a potential approval authority for these plans, at least not the way it's written today. Back to the shot clock. Local government has a 45-day shot clock to review these plans. If changes are requested, a local government then has 15 days to review the second round, and the only options are approval or denial. We don't get to review the second round and then say, okay, you need to do a third round. It's approval or denial. And if a local government has not provided a written decision within 60 days of original receipt, approval is automatic, and it moves on. It's also put on the local government to monitor the project to ensure that the workforce housing lots are constructed in an equal ratio to the rest of the lots, and that the purchaser of the workforce housing lot meets the criteria. So again, now we have what would seem to be the planning department reviewing the financial information of a potential home buyer in a neighborhood. And then finally, any person aggrieved by, quote, the failure of a local government to comply with this section may appeal directly to Superior Court. Typically, in an administrative approval, the Board of Adjustment is the appeal authority. In this case, it would be directly to Superior Court, and if you read the bill, not only is it directly to Superior Court, but they get to jump to the front of the line and get heard as quickly as the courts can hear them. It does not say anything about the rights of any neighboring property owner and their ability to appeal or anything like that, like would be the case today under any other approval granted by the city. As far as utilities go, the local government may not require a connection to a public utility operated by that local government. But at the same time, the local government may not deny an application to serve the workforce housing development unless, one, the capacity limits established by statute would be exceeded by connecting the project, or the nearest point of existing public utility infrastructure is more than 3 miles from the project. Southport's pretty small, geographically anyway.
So this would eliminate the agreement that we have with the county about crossing lines and all of that, where we're claiming that we have the right to be first up for any sewer system, like in ETJ. And if I'm reading this correctly, the homeowner gets to choose where they go. Am I reading this incorrectly?
Well, the developer would
Well, I'm
seemingly
sorry,
choose.
I meant the developer, right?
I would want our attorney's input on that particular point and how our existing contracts would fit into that, but seemingly at least it's a potential that, yes, this would override our existing agreement with Brunswick County.
Even if the project is within the city limits, the developer could choose to go with the county.
Unclear.
Seems so, though.
But potential, I mean, the way the bill is written, it seems like that is potentially on the table. So some overall takeaways here. Workforce housing developments must include at least 20% of workforce housing lots. So if you have 100 lots in the subdivision, at least 20 must meet the criteria of those workforce housing lots. No dimensional standards can be enforced and must be permitted in every zoning district. No vegetation requirements other than the perimeter buffer. The bill seemingly gives the ability to regulate floodplains and stormwater and other things, but qualifies that on only to the extent that the regulations are to comply with state and federal law. And aggrieved parties from the applicant side only may file appeal immediately to Superior Court if the local government is not following statute. So that's the last slide I have.
I'm still confused about one part.
Yes.
Let's assume that somebody had 376 acres in R20 right now. Just pick a figure. And they decided that they wanted to do 20% of this type of housing. And they had duplex. And they put the duplexes in. I don't understand how much land, how little land can they use for each duplex? In other words, what's the density level that they could do?
There's no minimum.
So there'd be no minimum on all the other buildings after that, as long as it was a duplex or less, like a single-family home, they could be wall to wall to wall to wall.
Yes.
So you could potentially put 2,000 units in a 376-acre plot if you jammed them in and you opened your window and shook hands with the guy next to you.
It could be as many lots as the developer could reasonably get on the property. It could be that maximized, yes.
And there's no open space at that point, right? Am I correct?
It doesn't appear to be, but
And what about wetlands or theoretical wetlands? How does that work?
state and federal law would still apply. Okay. So the wetlands requirements that the federal government, the Army Corps of Engineers regulates, and then anything that North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality regulates with regard to wetlands, all of that still applies. However, if the applicant is in a position to pay the mitigation on wetlands, then they could do that.
And that is, I believe, what they're trying to do in the Williamson track, is to fill all the wetlands in?
That's what I've heard, yes.
Okay. So you could possibly get all 376 acres to be used, and you could pack the houses in which there's virtually no distance between walls, exterior walls.
Yes.
Okay. And that's why we made a big point about having you all come here, so you could all hear that.
Travis, have you had any conversations with anybody that might be willing to handicap the chance of these bills being enacted?
I haven't had any conversations with folks yet who would surely give us a good handicap of those chances. What I can tell you, though, is that Senate Bill 317 right now has enough co-sponsors in which the vote would pass if just the co-sponsors voted for it. Now, House version doesn't exist yet, so of course there's a whole separate process that has to go on, but there are 30 co-sponsors on this bill, and there's only 50 senators.
Any further questions for Mr. Henley? Okay, very good presentation. The slides for our citizens should be on the website. Tomorrow probably, or is that right, Madam Clerk? The slides will be on the website tomorrow for anyone to look at and review. I would suggest reviewing them around 11 o'clock at night. And there's a lot of information, and this has been very helpful, and I certainly want the board to comment on this, and so we'll go down the line here. But very good presentation. Thank you for doing a lot of information, and you know I don't know the wisdom of stripping municipalities of their local authority. Even though there may be 30 co-sponsors, I'm not sure that as they look into that and see that may not be the best way forward in terms of how the state, not just Southport, but how the state looks at developments and that type thing. So this has been an excellent meeting, and I will start with board comments, and Alderman Allen.
Yeah, there's a lot I'd like to say, but I'm not going to say all of it, other than obviously, I'm sure as a board we're opposed to most of this, and I hope we can begin the fight against it and take it somewhere, because this is frankly absurd.
I'm in favor of the resolution. I'd like to see what that language looks like. This is, I can't believe this is the kind of stuff that we're having to fight against to protect our little town.
Alderman Alt.
If you follow legislation in any state capital when they're in their legislative process, you're going to find proposed bills that are like crazy, but you know they're not going to get pushed anywhere. This one, as Travis has pointed out, has the majority of the senators already on board of it. So this is a lot more, I'm going to use the word dangerous to us, than some of the other bills that are out there. And this is going to require us here on this board, you out there, to do a lot more than in the last 3 years that I've been paying attention to this stuff, than we've ever done before. As the mayor pointed out, this has to be a full court press with all the other mayors. This has to go to, and I'm not sure that this is even the right word, the right place, the COG. We have to get everybody on board. And this is, we have a very, very short timeline on this. I'm not sure when the bills switch over. Do you, Travis, know when that takes place?
I don't off the top of my head, but I can find out and let you know.
I mean, it's going to switch. When I say switch over, is that the Senate will vote on it, and then because it's a Senate bill, and then it will be pushed over to the House for their consideration. And that timeline is very short. So this is not something we're going to sit around on our laurels and contemplate and think great thoughts about. This is something we have to really jump on right now, and I applaud that the city is moving forward with the mayors, and we're going to have to, amongst ourselves, figure out every avenue we can use to let the elected officials know that the populace is not for this. Thank you.
And I just add something real quick. Apparently, the crossover date for the General Assembly is April 27th. So if it has to get over to the House by the 27th in order to have a chance of being enacted.
Thank you. Alderman Davis.
Thank you. Plain speaking, to be very clear about why would they even think about doing this, this is to allow for building. It is simply erasing almost all the brakes on building, such as, of course, tree preservation, all of the other requirements that we have in place, and many of us wish that we had stricter ones. But the fact is, we've got a number. This will simply wipe them out. And look who has sponsored this bill. The North Carolina Home Builders Association. It was not sponsored and brought forth by proponents of affordable housing. So that should tell you everything. Not only, I think, should we, as a board, pass a resolution, I hope that everyone sitting here, and I hope you're all just outraged and appalled, will contact your legislators. And can we put on our website and perhaps our city Facebook page how we contact our two legislators, Senator Bill Rayburn and our legislator Charlie Miller. And I think it'd be worthwhile to contact Eiler too. He represents the Oak Island, Holden Beach area as well. Now, I will say this, as far as I know, Bill Rayburn is not a co-sponsor of this. I don't know how you'd vote on it, but at least his name's not on the damn bill.
Alderman Lombardi.
Yeah, this is a lot to digest and a lot confusing, but I hope everybody takes it seriously. And I'm really happy that, and I hope everybody is doing what we're doing to try to understand this, all the municipalities and city governments. And that's the only way we're going to defeat this. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem.
I don't even know what to say. This is one of the things that we've all said at the table. It is all of us to do this. One of the things that the league encourages is direct contact. We're going to hopefully pass a resolution to get it moving today on the behalf of the city. But as individuals, don't just call our legislators, call every legislator you know, or call everybody you know in a different town that has a legislator and have them. It really has to be from the ground up, and it needs to be a groundswell. The Home Builders Association is so powerful because of the lobby and the money they represent. But we know how to work hard. So please, I'm hoping it spreads out, and all of this is wrong for us.
Thank you. So now I would certainly be willing to entertain a motion concerning the resolution so city staff can get started on this and writing it, and then we can get this to Raleigh, and certainly agree with all the comments from our board today. And citizen involvement is very important. Write your legislator, call their office. I mean, they have an office number. You just call them and tell them what you think. They have assistants there that will make sure that the representatives of the senator know that you called. I mean, you see that whether it's in Washington, D.C. or Raleigh, our elected officials have offices, and you can call them, and there are people there that will talk to you. So please do that. But Board, I'll entertain a motion concerning a resolution that we send the resolution to Raleigh, to the legislators, in particular our legislators, telling them that in particular we are opposed to local municipalities losing the authority over local developments and other issues in this bill.
Question, do we have that resolution put together yet to read out loud? I move that we draft a resolution and pass it.
There's a motion to draft a resolution. Is there a second?
I'll second that, but what I wonder if, in order to expedite this, I think we all are aware of the negatives of this, and I think staff is. Could your motion go ahead and facilitate staff writing it and the mayor and city manager reviewing it and getting it executed?
You know, my motion therefore clarified as such.
And I second it.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
I just question, make sure that, I'm in favor of the whole thing. But are we only sending it to 2 people? Or are we sending it to the 2 people specifically and to the legislature as a whole? And that's my question.
Let's send it to every legislator.
Well, I just want to make sure that when we walk out of here, we're all on the same page. Is that a friendly amendment to your motion, ma'am?
I don't think our motion dealt with being set to that.
Then,
Let's trust staff to do that.
I'm sorry, are we giving staff direction to do that? That's what I'm asking. It appears to be that there's at least 4 of us shaking our heads, but I can't see these 2 guys.
Yeah, staff will know which direction and who to send it to and that type. Like any other resolution that we would send, I'm sure that there is some sort of protocol that we have that who we would send this to, whether it's about this issue or any other issue. So we'll make sure that it gets out to the appropriate, Travis, make sure that it gets out to the appropriate elected officials and that type thing.
Would it also go to the governor?
Yeah. Sure, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, we'll make sure that this gets out, and fortunately, we have a free press that has been here, and that will be part of the story. For the pilot, we should be able to get in the deadline for tomorrow, so this will get out hopefully, and so in multiple ways, yes. And we'll work with the public information officer as well, community relations, and we will get this message out. So any further discussion? Okay. All in favor by show of hands? Okay. Any opposed? Okay, motion carried unanimously. Thank you. Thank you very much. Excellent meeting today. Thank you for your attendance. City manager, thank you. Thank you, city staff, for being here. Board, thank you. And again, we will get this message out. This is how we do things in Southport. We stand up for our city and our citizens and the quality of life, and we move forward in the best way possible. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Mr. Lombardi, second by Mayor Pro Tem. All in favor? Motion carried. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.